All right, I'm here with Maurice Broaddus. I said it right?
Yep, that's right.
We're in Indianapolis, outside of Starbucks, so you will hear traffic, but that's the authentic nature of two horror Hoosiers sitting down to talk. I'm mostly focused on Buffalo Soldier, since that's the book I just reviewed, and this will be a bonus feature in the Buffalo Soldier review. And so some people will listen to this interview and not read the review. And let's sell them Buffalo Soldier. What was the impetus behind Buffalo Soldier, and where did it start? Where did it come from, and why should they read it?
Okay, so Buffalo Soldier is kind of a sequel. It takes place in my steampunk universe. And so in my steampunk universe, America lost the Revolutionary War. Slavery went on for an extra 100 years. America is divided up into like three sections. There's like a Native American section. The Native Americans run the entire West Coast. America proper is all the way is the rest of the country except for Texas, which of course is its own nation.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
That's the world, and in this world, Jamaica is also a superpower because my mom's from Jamaica, and
right,
gotta respect moms.
I had a question about that.
Okay.
For later.
Okay. With Buffalo Soldier, you have an ex-espionage agent from Jamaica who's now on the run in America with a young boy in tow. It's a boy who is special,
right?
As the result of some government tampering, and so my lead character Desmond Coke, he's trying to forge a new life for him and this young boy, but they have to escape the forces that are chasing after him.
Yeah, so Buffalo Soldier too. Besides just being steampunk and alt history, it's both those things, but it's also an adventure tale. And in a lot of ways, it's almost like it seems like it has a little bit of the Fury or Firestarter, but set in this world.
Yeah.
Did I get that
Yes.
accurately?
Yeah,
Yes.
I love the way you put that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So, because it has like the secret agencies like trying to protect this psychically gifted child, basically. And what I find interesting too about that is that there's a lot of the criticism of Stephen King of the magical Negro, right? But in this, it's not. This kid isn't special for being of African descent. So in that sense, the Afrofuturism and the kinds of things that you've been exploring plays a huge role in Buffalo Soldier. So are you seeing this as like, there is no magical Negro because it's a magical world, right? Okay. And
for me, one of the things I'm always, that magical Negro trope is always playing in the back of my mind, because it's like, how do I subvert that, or how do I? I can see it play out so often. So for me, it actually plays out in that I'm not trying to do that. I'm creating a whole world where it's not just
there's magic about.
Magic's all over.
Yeah.
I've a lot of African characters. It's not just the one who just happens to wander through the story, and so that's where I tend to come at most of my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I didn't want to come off sounding as like judgmental on that or whatever. And obviously you're a writer of color, and so like we can't ignore that, because we know that there are not enough voices of color in the genre movements. And one of the things that's great is that about your work is that you do a fantastic job of doing that naturally, with not like over, like being I hate to use the word pedantic, but like you're doing it naturally, and so you've created a magical world here where it doesn't feel like it's playing with those tropes. It just feels like the reason I mentioned it is because I felt like you were subverting the trope by creating this whole world and having this character that was special in the middle of it.
Right.
So, all right. So I hope people will be interested in reading Buffalo Soldier. It's a short book, but it's jam-packed full of world building and a universe. Like, how is there a story that they would read in your collection that kind of sets up Buffalo Soldier?
Actually, the first story I wrote in the steampunk universe is called "Pimp My Airship," and that's in the Voice of the Martyrs collection, and it's from that story that all of these stories sprang out of. In fact, there's a character in Pimp My Airship called the Star Child. Well, actually, the Star Child is the child that's in Buffalo Soldier.
Right.
And there's like one line in Pimp My Airship about the 5 civilized nations. And when I was coming back to start writing Buffalo Soldier, I was like, what does that look like? And so, in a lot of ways, Buffalo Soldier continues to unpack, what I thought were a bunch of throwaway lines in Pimp My Airship. It's slowly unpacking each of those lines to further the world building.
Well, and that happens because, like, I just released, and I just handed you a copy of of a book that I can do deadlifts with, which is like 126,000 words, Yikes. And some of it came out of just one line where it turns into 30,000 words.
Right.
And it seems like, okay, so I loved Buffalo Soldier, but I loved Voice of Martyrs. And Pimp My Airship is a great story in it. So obviously I would encourage people to read all of them. But at this point, I want you to feel free to get spoilery. So those of you who have not read the book, hopefully now you're pausing this, you're heading to Amazon, you're going to pick up a copy of Buffalo Soldier or request it at your library. But now we're going to talk about the craft of writing this. And so you started with this line of the 5 nations. Did you do any maps or outlining of this world for the book or the world in general? Did you write the history out ahead of time?
The short answer is yes, kind of. Because you got to understand, world building is like my favorite part of writing. I come from
Me too.
I come from a gaming background, so any excuse for me to roll up a world, I'm going to do in a heartbeat. So I spend a lot of time thinking through this world because, like I said, the whole world started with the what-if question is, what if America lost the Revolutionary War and they were still a colony of England? What would that look like today? And so, I think through all of that. I think through what a timeline might look like. I think about the geopolitical ramifications of that. What happened to the Native Americans in this scenario, and I map out a history to that. And so by the time I'm done, why does Texas become its own nation? So first I map out the timelines and the major pivot points in history, create what the map overall would look like, and then I start filling in those details after that.
Right, and so did you get enough of an outline of the story just out of writing the history, or did you do a separate outline just of the story? I'm a big outliner, so
right. And I'm a half outliner because I've come to realize that no matter how detailed I make my outline, by the time I get halfway through the outline, I'm completely off target, and so it's time for me to and so I keep writing until I get stuck, and then I start a new outline. Like, okay, where should I go from here? And that's kind of the way I approach this one, because and it's that whole idea of how much world building is enough. Well, as soon as I got stuck in my writing, it's like, oh, I need more. I haven't built up enough world, so let me go back and build some more world, and so I can have more room to hang more of a story on.
Okay, so how much do you think about when you're doing a story like this? And because I know for myself, when I write a fictional world that's detailed, a lot of times I have to think very heavily about, is this actually how this character would behave in this world, right? That's a huge part of it. So you had to do, in this book, you had to think a lot about what this spy from Jamaica, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, he comes from a world power on an island. There's very specific things about how he interacts with the world. Mm-hmm. How much does the world building define the character? How much does the character define the world building?
Well, ideally, they're going to play off of each other. Right. And anytime you're creating a world, you basically want a world that is filled with its own inherent conflicts, things that are going to trip up your hero's journey, things that's going to cause your hero to, basically knock him off his path. When I created the character of Desmond Coke, he was a very layered character with a pretty complicated background, which worked for the previous story I'd written him in. Buffalo Soldier is a semi-sequel, but it's completely standalone. But I basically mapped out how would each of these characters speak. Each of them has a specific dialect that they use, and a different way. They speak one way in front of outsiders, or they speak one way inside of when it's just them and their tribe versus when they're dealing with outsiders, which you don't see as much in Buffalo Soldier because everyone's an outsider at this point. All this stuff goes into the creation of the characters.
Yeah, and one of my favorite parts is when Desmond basically asks for refugee status, right? And it's been about a month since I read it, so I can't remember if he was asking for refugee status from the state to the states, right?
To the Native American territory.
To the Native American territory. Okay. And that scene, I think, had a lot. That scene was very pivotal in the world building as well as the character, because it's just said a lot about both character and world building at the same time. And that's one of the reasons why I think that scene was like firm in my memory, even though I got some of the details wrong. It's been a month. I think some of those crux scenes, like right there, you had to think in that moment, you had to think about the political realities of the Five Nations, the political realities of Jamaica, and you had to think about how Desmond views the politics of both countries all in one scene.
Right.
And so to me that was like a really good example. I know I dog-eared the page when I was reading it. I was like, because I knew I was going to be talking to you at some point, and so I said, I got to ask Maurice about that, because when you find those scenes that kind of like where you got both skateboards under both your feet, right, and you're trying to balance, like that's got to be the sweet spot for world building.
Oh, absolutely. And so Gen Con was just last week, and there was a lot of discussion about the whole nature of tension. And one of my big contentions about tension is, scenes are going to be tense, or you create that sense of tension when there's a lot at stake. And so, and with that scene, you're right, there was a lot at stake there, because one misstep, and you could, by just simply asking that question, he could plunge America, Jamaica, and the Native American territories all into a war among each other.
Just by the decision he's making in that point. Yeah. Right. And so, it's funny because writers will always say, writers see the difference of, one thing I noticed is, like, when I was a kid or when I was younger, I was like, I'm going to love writing all the action scenes. I'm going to write, like, these big action set pieces. But those moments of tension are so much more fun, right, when you're doing those dynamics.
I was just thinking, there's a scene earlier when Desmond's in the nation state of Texas, and there's a scene where it's him, one of the major corporate moguls of Texas, as well as the assassin who's been trailing him for a while, all sitting down to order drinks.
Right.
And that was actually one of my favorite moments to write, because they're sitting around and they're just ordering drinks together, and full well each of them's trying to figure out the agenda of the other.
Right.
And it's just this casual conversation, but again, the stakes are high, and one misstep and everything could end in a bloodbath. And again, but you're right, that's my sweet spot. I'm just like, how long can I stretch this out? Because, it's agony knowing that you don't know which is going to be the trigger that could cause things to go horribly wrong.
Well, I think that's why writers love The Hateful Eight, and a lot of other people don't. Because, like, all the tension, everything is all in the words. It's all in how they interact, and I think, and that's funny because I definitely think, like, some of the best moments of Buffalo Soldier are all in those confrontations. And you did write a good villainess who creates a lot of tension in those scenes, and for that reason.
I'm not going to lie. She's one of my favorite characters I've ever written.
Yeah, can you tell me more about her?
That's Kate Siringo. And she was when I was researching to build the world, I researched a lot of historical characters, and there was a female Pinkerton agent that I ran across that in a lot of ways she's patterned on, but just the whole idea of just this badass lady, running around, because she has her own thing where she has to prove herself to her employers, and because women aren't seen as in these sort of roles. They're just they have a rep that they have to build and maintain, and so she's trying to do that as a part of her own character arc.
Well, yeah, and maybe villainous isn't right. Antagonist right. Is better, and she's just an absolutely fully realized character. Amazingly well drawn, and for that reason, that's one of the reasons why this book works for me, because all the characters are like, oh, I want to know more about that person, and so you'll see when the review comes out that I wrote a lot about the strengths of the characters, and and how yes, the setting is cool, and yes, we have the gee whiz of the alt history and all that, but it's how the characters interact with this world that make Buffalo Soldier really, really good. And I think a thing that hopefully, and there's writers listening to this and trying to glean from your wisdom, and what they'll get out of it is to look for how world building interacts with characters. And I wonder if you could specifically talk about, you kind of already did, but how world building and character comes together in, do you have a philosophy of how those two things interact, or? Because look, going back to your Kingmaker books,
okay,
even right, and which is your King Arthur meets the Wire kind of Indianapolis novels, the world, which as somebody who grew up in Indiana, I was somewhat familiar with the world, but I grew up an hour south, but I knew enough about this world that I kind of had a leg up on it. But the world building in that book, for example, is very, very strong, and it interacts with the characters very well. So do you have a philosophy on that? Is the question.
Yeah. And it depends. So with something like Kingmaker, where so much of on the surface, on the surface you could look at it as basically a crime novel, in many ways, and
with just fantastical elements,
right? And so with crime novels, we depend on writers, kind of depend on consensus reality to do the bulk of the heavy lifting for the world building. So I'm sort of playing with that. I'm like, yeah, you think you know this world because it's Indianapolis. But then it's and now I'm going to take you deeper and deeper. So then pretty soon you don't even realize, but it's wait, I thought we were in Indianapolis, and yet there's all this magic that's going on around us, because I as part of my slow descent into the magic, I wanted to slowly draw you into that. Because ultimately for me, world building, if you notice it, I don't know how to put that. My job with the world building is to basically out-imagine the reader. And ultimately that's all I'm trying to do, is because we're geeks, ultimately. Yeah. we're geeks, and we love to be thrown into these new worlds, and we want to spend time in those worlds and kick the tires of the world, make sure that world makes sense. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do when I'm doing world building, is to create a world that can drop you into, give you room to lose yourself in it, but it still makes sense according to its own rules.
Okay, so I'm going to close this out here. So, but as a last point, look, we all like to learn from other writers and these other things, and at all these conventions and times that we get to talk to each other, we want to learn some skills from reading each other's work and some things, and. Me personally, I'm a structure guy. I love structure of storytelling. I like a good organized. That's why F. Paul Wilson is one of my favorite writers, right? Because his books are amazingly structured, and I think he's my plotting Yoda. And so, but every time I sit down with a new writer, I like to pick their brains about, what is it that is the core of storytelling for you. And maybe you've already said that with the world building, but at the same time, what makes a Maurice Broaddus book, And what is the core of your storytelling? What's your greatest strength that you are not, humbly speaking, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. What is your greatest strength as a writer? And what to the people who are just learning your name here?
All right, so well, you're right. It's hard to answer that question. Humbly speaking, here's what I'm great at. But I would say the two areas that I think are my two biggest strengths are, one, yes, my world building. I'm not going to lie. I spend a lot of time world building, and I do think I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And then my dialogue, frankly.
Yeah.
If I'm known for two things, it's going to be my world building and my dialogue.
Yeah. Your dialogue is great.
Thank you. And so I think that's at the core. You're going to get, in a Maurice Broaddus story.
Can I add one?
Okay. Well, okay.
To what makes a Maurice Broaddus?
Please tell me more about my strengths.
Yes, I'll tell you about your strengths. Unflinching eye. Ooh. Unflinching eye. Like, I know it was a big deal made for those who are horror show listeners. The part that you read from Kingmaker, right, with the razor blades. Mm-hmm. So if you're not a horror show listener, you wouldn't know this, but Maurice read a part of Kingmaker, and I think, to just give an example of how there's a moment in that book where it's like the point of no return for the story, right? And I think a lot of your stories have that unflinching eye, like in Voice of Martyrs, right? There's the story about the boxer, right? And I don't want to give it away because it's a short story, so there's only so much I can say, but there's moments where the main character is being pretty victimized, right? And I was reading that on my commute to work on the bus, and so I spent a lot of time just putting the book down and going, oh my God, come on now. And look, I'm a pretty hardened reader. Right. So I would say the unflinching eye is a part of Maurice Broaddus. So what's the secret to the unflinching eye?
I think part of it is like, I spend a lot of time staring at like the hard truths of life, and the hard realities of life, and sort of directing the reader like, hey, you know what? This is in the world around us, and sometimes it's tough, but you have to wrestle with it.
Right. And yeah, I think that is a huge part of it. Okay, so Maurice Broaddus, how do people find your work if they've made it this far?
Let's see. I make things pretty easy. So my Twitter, my Facebook, my website is all Maurice Broaddus, BROADDUS, MauriceBroaddus.com.
Right. And I would suggest starting with Voice of Martyrs. Okay. Because, first of all, it'll set up Buffalo Soldier. Pimp My Airship. Yep. But also, it is definitely going to be in my top 10 reads of the year, which is not a little feat because I'm way ahead of my reading goal, and I'm definitely going to read over 80 books this year. Nice. So, when I say it's top 10, I mean that it's really good. So, fantastic writer. And the last, I lied. One last thing. Okay. But I have you here. You're a Hoosier, and I'm going to do some Hoosier fan service. Okay. Sammy Terry. What's the history with Sammy Terry? Because here's the thing. For those of you out there who are not from Indiana, we had a horror host in Indiana that was on a local channel, Channel 4, and he would host horror movies on Friday nights. And he's the reason I'm a writer. He's probably the reason the guy sitting across from me is a writer. What was the impact of Sammy Terry and the movies he showed on Friday nights at 11:30 on Channel 4?
Channel 4, yep.
To Maurice Broaddus.
It's funny because at the time, it wasn't until you and I were starting to talk about that, I started reminiscing. I was just like, you know what? Sammy Terry's had a huge impact on me and the way I look at the world. And it's one of those things I hadn't even realized that, I spent many a Saturday evening staying up, either staying up or sneaking out of bed after everybody assumed I was in bed to go down and watch TV. And to watch all these movies that I had no business watching when I was like, whoa, man, how old was I? Like 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there.
And think about the fact that he was a pastor of a church.
Right.
He was owned a music store in Indianapolis. Yep. And he did signings and things at all the big carnivals and conventions.
In full costume.
Full costume.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Sammy Terry, like, he talked to a spider on a string named George.
Right.
Right, and he'd introduced Hammer horror movies.
Right.
Like, consistently Hammer, but that's also how I first saw Night of the Living Dead.
Yep.
That's how I first saw Phantasm. Was on Sammy Terry. I don't know how Phantasm ended up on Sammy Terry,
Right.
but because it's a little new for
Right,
Sammy.
for Sammy, right?
Yeah, but and he had like green skin and like a purple suit, and he had a subtitle in quotation or in ellipses. It said "Ghoul."
Right.
Sammy Terry Ghoul.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge impact on all of us in
Right,
Indiana.
right.
Like, I know metal musicians, artists, makeup artists, filmmakers, writers like you and I. We all can chart it back to Sammy Terry.
Well, yeah, I mean, it basically taught me the vocabulary of horror, the vocabulary of storytelling, all boiled down to, staying up late watching Sammy Terry movies.
Yeah, Sammy Terry's the shit. So, on that note,
That's the name of that can be the title of this interview.
Sammy Terry's the shit. Well, and I would encourage, for those of you who are out there like pumping your fist and going, yeah, Sammy Terry is a hero of mine. His son has picked up the mantle, and they are selling Sammy Terry merch, and it is my plan to get a Sammy Terry T-shirt and start representing here pretty soon. I made the decision a couple weeks ago, and so I'm gonna pick up Sammy Terry merch and rep, because young Hoosiers of a younger age don't understand how cool. Because for me, it was like there were two things. There was Sammy Terry and the comic book store in Bloomington, my hometown. We had a comic book store called 25th Century 5 and Dime, which is an amazing name for a comic book store, right? And those Sammy Terry and 25th Century 5 and Dime were the essence of Indiana weird that got me into being a nerd and doing all those things, and people don't understand, because now, like, it's kind of cool to be a nerd and you can search all these things on the internet, but like back then being a weirdo was not as
it was not a thing.
It was not as fun.
You hid that.
yeah, because like I just know kids are different now. Like, one of my friends who's a high school teacher said that the trans kids hang out with the football players. Like, it was like, that didn't happen when I was growing up, I'm glad it does.
I'm glad it does, but
that just wasn't happening.
Right.
So, love to Sammy Terry, and check out Maurice's books. So, anything else, Maurice?
Nope. Thank you for having me.
All right.